Resume recording there. That should do it. Okay. So for the recording, we do have all of our members present: Paul Fortin, Warren Mayhew, George Emond, and Dave Passios, our agent, Jim Gareffi, and our administrative assistant, Andrea Schmirth. And we're expecting Bob Proctor at any moment. Consistent with the open meeting law, I needed to advise everybody that we are being recorded, and it is. And it will be broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access within 24 hours, actually. The town of Lunenburg, in response to the COVID-19 coronavirus, is currently following the guidance of the Lunenburg Board of Health, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus, and steps communities can take to prevent the spread, and all town facilities are currently closed to the public. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law 30A, paragraph 20, all public meetings are being conducted remotely. The order, which you can find posted on the town website on the COVID-19 Information Center page, accessed through the town manager's webpage, allows local public bodies to meet entirely remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access, and I think this is important, does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. And this meeting will allow for some public comment at the very end, because I think that is appropriate that we do allow for some public comment, but we're not going to take it during the meeting or in the middle of the meeting. However, the members of the Board of Health, can comment obviously at any time and on any subject. For this meeting, the Board of Health is convening by Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public could join in. Please note that the meeting again is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording and of course could be misused. We're now turning really to the first item of on our agenda. But before I do that, I'm supposed to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our meeting and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. So I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of the members and invite each of them to provide any comment, questions, motions, et cetera they want. And so please kind of hold. It's going to be a little awkward to do it this way, but it ensures that everybody has an opportunity. It is normally recommended that you mute your phone when you're not speaking, but that doesn't seem to have been a terrible problem tonight. The value I've found when people do that is that it does cut back any feedback that might occur. But do please remember to speak clearly in any case, and it'll help to generate accurate minutes. For any response, it's best to wait to get, speak through the chair as we normally would do, and to have the chair recognize you before speaking. And if you want to engage even in a comment to another member and so on, it's best to do that through the chair. For items of public comment, those we are going to ask people to hold till the very end of the meeting. And at the moment, it doesn't appear to me that we have any participants. I don't see any from outside our group. So at that time, what we're going to do is get a list of all the public commenters that might be calling, and then we'll give them each 3 minutes, and we'll allow them to to speak individually.
Excuse me,
Yes.
Bob Proctor is here.
Wonderful, Bob.
Hello.
Bob Proctor is here to represent our first, and your timing is perfect because we were just ready to turn to number 73 Hollis Road,
Yep.
which is requesting two variances, really. And Andrea, could you read those, or do you want me to read them? Or George,
yeah.
or any?
Where are they?
Shall I read it?
Yeah, why don't you read it?
Okay, I have a letter here from, Doug Smith of Soil Smith Designs requesting local upgrade variances for 73 Hollis Street. And that's further identified specifically and of course being done care of Bob Proctor Excavations. The local upgrade variances are 310 CMR 15.404, 3, requesting a local upgrade approval to allow a reduction in the 4-inch requirement of naturally occurring pervious material below the entire area of the soil absorption area. It has been determined that the 4 inches of required soil does not exist anywhere on this site. That's the first. The second is local upgrade variance again for alternative to perk testing. That's the 310 CMR 15.104, 310 CMR 15.405, L and I. Lab test of soil was performed instead of conducting a perk test, excuse me, due to high groundwater in the most restrictive soil layer. Thank you for your consideration. Those are the two variances. Now, I do know that in addition to that, Andrea did send out the detailed, I might add, drawing that outlines just about anything and everything you could possibly want.
Yep.
Jim, did you, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Bob, or we'll just have Jim kind of talk through this too.
Yeah, let Jim.
Terry, before you do that, you said 4 inches, don't you, 4 feet?
Yeah, go ahead, George. What?
When you read that, you said 4 inches.
It's 4 feet, George.
Feet. I know
Okay.
it is. Terry said 4 inches. That's
You're absolutely right. It's 4 feet.
4 feet, yeah.
That's got a single little.
Yep.
Yeah,
Ricky.
I've been guilty of that, Terry.
Yeah, no, very good comment, George.
It's
Good
4
comment.
feet. Okay.
So, Bob, did you want to comment on anything else or just?
Well, not unless you guys have any questions. I mean, we dug
Yeah.
over the property and we're, got the best holes we could get, which, there is material there. Obviously, it's not the 4 feet, so we're going to have to build it up anyway. So.
Yeah. So, Jim, what do you think? Normally, you give us some comments with regard to these.
So it's a tough site. Unfortunately, it's really ledgy in that area. Again, they poked some holes as they were coming down. That if you look at the plan, they dug a series of holes coming back just to see where they might find soil. They found the deepest layers of soil well in that back corner. I think to the back right, if your back was to the house, where they found the most soil to actually work with. State code allows boards to reduce the soil layer up to 2 feet. And again, it's in conjunction with the use of the Presby system. So Presby system is being used less than 2 feet or less than 4 feet of soil. So it was too wet, so they had to run a sieve. Again, I don't see what else you can do on that site. It's probably the best alternative. There's a well up front, so that arc kind of draws you all the way to the back of the property anyway.
Paul,
So
did you
he's
have
looking
any
to reduce
questions or
that.
comments?
They're looking to reduce that to 2 feet from 4 feet, as it wasn't specific.
So what they'll do is there's only 2 feet of soil there. They'll build the system at 4 feet, 4 feet above the water table. So they're going to put a bunch of sand under it anyway. But the local upgrade approval that they're requesting has to do with the fact that there's not 2 feet of pervious naturally occurring soil in place already.
Or 4 feet.
4 feet, I'm sorry.
Trouble with
Bob, you
inches,
should have done this.
There is 2 feet. There's not 2 more feet.
That's
Yeah.
right. There you go.
No, that's a good point, Warren.
they're going from 4 to 3, right, Bob? To 2, rather, I'm sorry.
To 2, yes,
They're looking for a 2-foot offset.
for the amount of pervious soil.
Right.
Jim, how about the offset to groundwater? That's going to be a full 4 feet?
It is.
Yeah, he's gonna have a mountain in his backyard,
Right.
Ian Hill.
Yep, sieve
Okay.
analysis and not enough soil.
Yeah, Paul, do you have any questions or comments? Or
I'm good.
Mr.
George,
Chairman,
any?
motion that we vote to grant the requested variances.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and second that these 2 variances be granted. All those in favor, and I'm going to go by this one by one, which we're asked to do on a kind of a roll call vote. So first, I'll go to Paul Fortin
Yes.
and Warren Mayhew
Aye.
and Dave Passios
Aye.
and George Eman.
Yep, yes.
Okay, so that unanimously passes.
And Mr. Chair, aye for yourself.
Yes,
Don't
Okay.
forget,
the unanimous part of it is that Perry Jewell also votes in favor of it.
Need to hear you say it.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Sorry.
No, it's good for the record.
Yep.
Okay,
Bob, how
So I
soon
guess,
will you look
Bob,
into
that's,
the system?
that does it. I don't know if you want to pick your permit up now or. what's
Yeah,
your-
well, it's probably something we're not gonna do for a little while, but,
Okay.
But that's up to Andrea and you right
yeah,
there.
whenever.
I'm here all the time, so if Jim wants to drop them off, I'll sign them, so that one will be ready.
I'm actually headed to Cove Terrace first, Jim, then we'll see about that one afterwards.
Okay.
So I'll shoot you an email when.
So thank
Okay.
you for coming in, Bob. I guess, we
Yeah.
like to have someone here just in case there are some questions.
Definitely. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Okay,
We're all
we'll see you
set.
guys later.
All right, Bob,
okay.
Take care.
Buddy.
Thanks, you too.
And the
Mr.
next-
Chair, if we need to do this too many more times before we can meet in person,
Yes,
I'd like to request that we have the plan available for screen share.
I'll pick up the permit at some point.
Yeah, after he
for
drops
screen
them.
share, yeah.
Yes.
The plans were sent to each of us individually for that reason.
Couple of them.
Did you get one, Dave?
I don't believe so unless I missed it. I got about 14 emails today, so I may have missed it.
83.
Okay, it went out
last week.
several days ago.
I
I'm
do
sorry
not
that you
believe I got
didn't
it.
get that because that was done and
I go.
So you-
did you got it, Warren, did you, or,
I did get it, yes.
and
Yeah,
It may be somewhere in my inbox then.
Paul, did you get the drawing?
Yeah.
And George?
Yeah, I got it. It's a little bit difficult to read on an.
It is, you have to blow it up and look at it in pieces.
Right, the best I could do.
I know, you got the whole thing in there,
Thanks, Andrea.
but
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
sort of a related matter. Since we are in this, I don't know, abeyance of meetings
yes,
for permits, of course, Board of Health members, the members themselves are supposed to be signing off on these permits. But during these tough times, I would like to recommend, we can take a vote on it if you like, that when we have a permit like this that needs to be signed at some point, that we're to help out the installer and the homeowner, that we can authorize Andrea to sign these with a notification to the board that she's doing that.
would anyone object to that, or, I mean, the only other alternative would be to try to swing by the office, and individually sign it at some point when
I
Andrea's
don't
there.
understand the authorization request.
He's asking that we authorize Andrea, for instance, on this last one here that we just approved, to sign our names on, or sign the permit.
Yeah, our name's on.
It's traditional that the chair of the committee be authorized, not not the administrative
Yeah,
assistant.
no, I can do that. You can authorize
Well,
if you want.
That's, Dave, that's true, but, you know, if we, at some point in the future, someone's gonna pick up a permit 10, 15, 20 years down the road, see one signature, and if there's an issue, it's gonna turn into a bigger issue. I think if we can have an authorization, on a notation even on the permit itself that authorized signatures per Board of Health vote, put today's date on it, whatever, do it that way. I don't like surprises 20 years down the road. I've seen like 30 years.
Well, I could
before.
sign it as chair, I guess. I guess Dave is absolutely right in the sense that that's what's normally done, unless there's a good reason
aware
to
of that.
do it otherwise. But
Aware of that
um,
regular- that-
that's what they do with paying the bills and everything right now. Instead of having all the selectmen sign them like they usually pass that pile down, is they have just the chair do it.
And then at the next meeting, whether it be remotely or face-to-face, that's announced what was signed and for the record that they were signed under that authorization.
I would think that should be done prior to them being signed and issued, any official document. I'll cede to the wisdom of the board here, but I don't like it.
Well,
move
I know that,
Is there a motion on the floor or there was no second for any motion that I'm
Make
aware of?
no, I don't think, we were just in
What
a
what
more
are
of a
we talking
discussion.
about? I'm sorry. What are we talking about?
About
Authorization to
signing
sign.
of permits.
So are we changing the way it's done?
Well, normally we would sign them at our meeting.
And then when you miss signing them, I tell you that you miss signing them and I sign your name. So is that not appropriate now?
Well,
I don't
that's what,
believe- I don't
that's
believe
kind of
so.
what George was
With
proposing.
remote meetings, I don't believe so.
It's not official by doing it that way, Andrea. Without, I think a vote of the board takes care of that. As long as the board is notified, I have this permit and I'm going to sign your name to it, George. I'm going to sign your name.
Okay.
Name to it that way. However, that needs to be voted on, and I'll make a motion to that effect. And we'll go from there.
I need to clearly understand what the motion is because I disagreed with what was said initially.
The motion is to authorize the administrative assistant to sign the names of the board members onto the permit by a vote, authorization by a vote of the board during the time when we are not having regular meetings. Permits have to have at least a majority of the board sign valid. So we need a minimum of 3. And unless everybody can stop by the board's office and sign these things, why are we putting?
But you can't because you're considered the public and you're not allowed in.
Well, that's the point of contention, I would think. That's the point of argument.
Well, there is a, as we say, this sort of thing is being done by the select board quite a bit at the
Good.
moment, is to Dave's point, and
Yep.
they have authorized their Tom Alonso to do it. But the point is that the board has to authorize someone to do it. There has to be the authority there. And then it should be, again, after the fact, obviously, after the, the approval has taken place.
Right.
So you
I don't
guys have
feel
just approved
strongly one way or the
73
other.
Hollis Road. How are
Yeah.
you intending that this permit be signed?
That's what we're talking about.
Right.
That's what we're talking about, Andrea.
And basically, there's 2 alternatives. Either I could come in and sign it as the chairman, which is similar to what Dave is proposing, or we could have you sign it, which is really what George is proposing.
Okay.
How do you feel, Warren?
I don't know what precedence there is.
Well, the event is
And I can swing by, and sign papers.
How do you feel, Paul?
I'm okay with Andrea signing.
as am I.
I can go either way myself.
Point of
Dave?
order, there's no second on the floor.
Yeah.
At one point, we had done this, we had made an authorization at one point to do this with stamps. We never got to a point where we were using 5 stamps or even 3 when we had 3 board members. But if we had, well, needed one in summertime vacations, we didn't have 3 members to do it. We had stamps and we had an authorization to use your signature to stamp the permits. So it's not unprecedented. This particular situation is unique. And I think to solve the issue, I think we may need to do something a little bit unique.
All right, George, state your motion one more time, and perhaps Paul wants to second it.
Okay. The motion is with the permission of the board members individually as it becomes necessary. The administration is up to signatures, up to 3 signatures to validate a septic system permit.
And I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor and properly seconded that Andrea sign up to 3 names on these permits for permits that have already been approved by the board. Is there any further discussion on this? Okay, all those in favor, I'm going to do a roll call again. Warren?
I'm fine with that.
That was Warren Mayhew. Paul Fortin,
Aye.
Dave Passios,
Abstain?
and George Eamon.
Yes.
And I'll vote yes on that for 4 votes, 4 in favor and 1 abstention. Did you get that, Andrew?
I did.
Okay, the next item on our agenda here is a COVID-19 update by our agent and head of Neshoba, Jim Garaffi. Obviously, he, as you've seen from some of the stuff we've sent out, has been a very busy man lately. And most of these updates we get are things he seems to do over the weekend in the evening. But go ahead, Jim.
Thank you very much, Barry. So again, things have changed and they change all the time. I've had conversations with people while the governor is giving his news conference, and something has changed during the time of that call. So again, the frequency with which we try to update things really is dependent on the things, how fast they're changing. Probably one of the biggest things as things are changing is we're getting complaints, and not a lot of them. And we try to address all of them, try to go out to the sites and address all of them. Anything from people not wearing masks and gloves to people not keeping the proper distances. And then yes, a couple of complaints about Walmart that were pretty lengthy. And I've been out to Walmart a couple of times, Hannaford's a couple of times, and they seem to be doing what they need to do. So we're taking those, I'm out in the field doing those requests to follow up on complaints. Bridget's out too with the food service establishments doing kind of stop-in inspections, making sure people are, keeping their chairs in such a manner that people aren't sitting in them, reminding them of the things that are happening. One of the things she did was put up on our Facebook page a request that people donate face coverings so that we could pass them out to people who needed one. We've had kind of an overwhelming response to that. People are dropping off sewn masks regularly, and she'll take those out when she's doing inspections and offer them to people who may need them in establishments. Probably the biggest piece of what the Board of Health's doing is this contact tracing. So normally we have 2 public health nurses who run our monthly clinics, do visits to people in your community, follow up on regular communicable disease situations in the towns. We now have 6 full and part-time nurses working to do the contact tracing. So when we receive cases from the state through the disease surveillance system, MAVEN, they'll get those reports, they'll contact those individuals, they'll explain to them the requirements for isolation, which have changed recently, the number of days, minimum number of days. They'll also, as part of that conversation with the person who's tested positive go through and get a list of all of their close contacts. And for the state, close contact means anyone that the person was within 6 feet of for more than 15 minutes. Those individuals have had, if they had that close contact, the possibility to be infected. And so they're asked to quarantine for 14 days. That still remain the same. And so then our nurses will follow up both on the people who are instructed on isolation and those on quarantine to release both of them when it's appropriate. So again, a big part of what they're doing, contacting these individuals. You may have heard of the contact tracing collaborative that the state is setting up. Again, the big goal of the state is to try to reach everybody who's either tested positive or who may be a contact, to try to get them to either isolate or quarantine so you can kind of slow the spread of the disease. And that, since that's such a time-consuming task, that contact tracing, the state stood up about 1,000 individuals that will be working in conjunction with local boards of health at those boards' request to help out with the contact tracing. So right now, I think the state has hired about 1,000 people in the surveillance system, Maven. If we wanted to have a contact tracing collaborative help us out with those things, we just kind of check a box asking the case to go to them. They would take over that role that we would have done at that point. One caveat to that is that any difficult cases, so any kind of facilities, any cluster of cases, all of those things remain with the board. And the board can choose to keep the cases that may be sensitive because we know the family, we know the individuals, we know something about the situation that we feel it may be better for us to deal with that case ourselves. I don't know if anybody has any questions. That's a whole lot of stuff about the contact tracing, or I can continue with the update.
I would have only one there that, and I don't know if anyone else has one first, but I would be concerned in the contact tracing, you know, about privacy, obviously, but then some people pushing back and not, I think it's still all just guidelines, isn't it? And recommendations that these people quarantine themselves that have been exposed.
So the board's authority to do this kind of work comes under the communicable disease regulations. And in that set of regulations, it actually talks about isolation and quarantine. This is something, it's a little bit more than an advisor. It's really, the board can compel somebody to do this. And if you read the regulations, the board's supposed to start with the least restrictive way of doing it. So we always approach it as we really need you to do this because there's a public health good and a public health reason for doing this. But if somebody chose not to do it, the board can send an order. And then if they don't comply with the order to either isolate or quarantine, in theory, you could take them to Superior Court and get a court order against them. And you could, I mean, again, this is all new to us, most of us in public health, because it hasn't happened in so long. You could actually compel somebody to state hospital to serve out their isolation or quarantine. I mean, again, the goal is always to get compliance, voluntary compliance.
But this is now people, this is just people who have been exposed for like 15 minutes by being within 6 feet of someone, like say the workers of this person.
So two components. One is if you're the person who tests positive,
Yes,
that means you're sick. So
that's more understandable.
So sick individuals actually they're required to isolate. The
Yes.
requirements at home are pretty close to the same. You're really supposed to stay away from people in the house, separate from, try to keep facilities separate to the extent that you can. The goal is really you're infectious, stay away from and handle all of your materials in such a way to be separate from the household.
Yeah.
And so those people isolate. For people who are close contacts to them, and again, that's that 15 minutes for more within 6 feet, they're not sick right now, but they've had an opportunity to possibly be infected. And so that 14 days is the incubation period that you really want them out of the public so that if they do develop symptoms, it helps reduce the number of people who are exposed to the disease. And so that is a more defined time frame. And that's called quarantine. So quarantine is for people who aren't yet sick, but have been exposed.
So if you had like, say, workers in a fast food area or something who had all kind of been in less than 6 foot proximity and one of them gets sick, they could all end up being required to be quarantined for
Correct.
2 weeks.
Correct. again, it's a imperfect process at best. It relies on the person who tests positive to give us that list of people who they believe they had that close contact with. Sometimes in a workplace, we can talk to a supervisor or a shift manager to try to get a sense of who may have been close contacts. And some of the facilities, kind of interestingly enough, they have cameras. And so people have, and even some of the retail stores have cameras. So the managers are able to give us kind of who the people are who are in close contact with that person. So we have different ways to try to ascertain that information.
This just seems like a huge effort. Could be
It
potential.
is, and that's why they're trying to do the contact tracing component.
Yeah. Any other questions for Jim on this or anything else? Did you give us an update today on the cases in our hometown?
When I'm done this, I'm going to send those out.
Okay.
So it's gone up a little bit. Let me just finish the update for you. I figured that was a lot with the contact tracing.
Yes.
4 days a week, the state has public health calls. And I think I sent information out. If you have questions, you can certainly give me a call. We can share them at the public health calls. But they're designed, the state, because you're part of a health district, they've kind of broken the state now down into large cities. And I think there's 14 or 15 that determine large cities, health districts, and there's a number of those, and they call affiliated communities. So they're trying to deal with us in smaller chunks, which kind of helps because the opportunity to ask questions, there's a greater opportunity to ask questions. So 2 days a week are district meetings, 2 days a week are what they call all-town meetings. So again, it's our opportunity to ask questions, get updates from the states, and I'll send those updates if they send it by way of email to the board. Again, if we get questions from businesses about requirements, the gloves and mask are a big one to start with. Now that question changes a little bit on Wednesday because of the governor's new order. We at the office still have some questions about what it means to people, what the public means, places the public can enter, how we're going to try to enforce that. So it'll be an interesting process, I think, going forward. Gloves at this point aren't required. And we try to have the conversation with people about gloves. Unless you have really good hand hygiene in general, gloves are just an extension of your hand. So if you have this habit of touching your face or your eyes or your mouth, it doesn't matter whether it's your hands or a set of gloves, those hands still become infected potentially with anything you've touched and anything you touch on your face. So again, we try to instruct people more on good hand hygiene than anything else. The masks, some of like Walmart now requires their employees to wear masks in the facilities. And they've done that before the order. More and more places are ordering or requiring, I should say, their employees to wear masks. A lot of plexiglass is going up between cashiers, which I can understand. I mean, if you're ever in a retail establishment, that's the closest point that you're going to be with somebody. So that makes sense, that kind of an engineering control for the facility. We are providing the addresses of those people who test positive to police and fire. So if they need to respond to a location, they know that there's somebody at that location who's tested positive. We are trying to provide updated information sheets that you can put up on the website. We talked a little bit about the mask order. MEMA puts out this situational report every day. And when I do the updates to the boards, I try to include that. It has a lot of really good information, a lot of really good news. Has the dashboard of cases from the state on there for the whole state. Again, a really good information. And then I guess the last thing is we got a request to do an order for the White Street property there for the housing authority, kind of restricting visitors to the property. I want to talk to and if you look at the guidance that they got from, I think it's DHCD, it's talking about high rise and medium rise properties. Essentially buildings have lots and lots of people in it. The White Street units, I think, are quads. And I think if people don't have their own entrance, they may share it with one or two other people. So I'm not sure it's terribly appropriate to order no visitors to the property, but I wanted to speak to the housing authority first before I presented that to the board for something for your consideration.
Well, we all got a copy of your letter, Jim. Matter of fact, I responded to the letter I think everybody should have gotten a copy of the letter. It seems as though the further we go down this road to good health, the rules and regulations are draconian, and it's a little bit out of hand, I think.
Yeah, we got your notice on that. And I think in all fairness, the letter was drafted by the Leominster Housing Authority people who manage the Lunenburg one. And Andrea had an interesting insight on that. Her idea was that she thought it might be because of Mother's Day coming up this weekend, and that they had, quite a bit of traffic in and out of there on Easter. So, if that's the case, it's kind of like tonight or not at all on that.
Yeah.
I share, your presentation there, Jim, that to me, the letter that the state sent out talked about high-rise and, semi-high-rise buildings. And I think of, things like in Fitchburg, where they have 15-story buildings with elevators, and, it's a whole different situation where you've got, more or less townhouses in one case, and in another case, small apartment buildings that, may not have more than 4 sharing a couple of entrances. I'm less excited about it, I guess. I hate to do things different than the neighboring towns. I hate to find ourselves in a situation of asking our police to enforce, something different than, people might be, just in Townsend or in Shirley or Air or Lancaster, what have you. But Jim, you want to talk with our own authority first?
Yeah, I guess I could talk with them and see if they've had any complaints to the authority. See, it talks about trying to have a sign-in sheet. Now, in talking with the person who manages the Littleton Housing Authority, again, they have a similar kind of situation where they have smaller buildings. I think they're quads. And what she did was she put up a voluntary kind of visitor sign-in sheet inside the buildings. Again, one of the things that they're concerned about, not only people coming in, but who came in. And her thought was putting those sign-up sheets in. If people write their name down, if something were to happen, at least you can get in touch with people who were in the building.
Yeah, that would not necessarily require, us to take any action if that's something the housing authority itself would like to do.
Sure, that would be more of a voluntary situation at that point.
I think I'd have no problem personally with anything that, they want to do on a voluntary basis or guidelines, and things that make sense just in general. But I don't know, to say that nobody can go into these people's apartments except, medical people, to say that families can't or a single family member couldn't is, we want to protect our old people by locking them up. It's.
Yeah, that's my feeling.
I don't know. Warren, you deal with this stuff all the time. How do you feel about these things? I don't know. He probably didn't hear me at all. Warren, you deal with this stuff all the time. How do you feel about these?
I like what you had or what George had emailed back in a reply saying he doesn't want to overstep what the state and federal guidelines have already said, and then that I don't think that we have any buildings that are large enough. Yes, I've been in the bigger complexes that have the single entrance and where people can congregate, and they can't stay far away from people. And I think that in places like that they need to limit the number of visitors. I think everybody went around it wrong right from the beginning. I think they should have shut down the facilities that had the high risk, the highest risk people, the nursing homes, the soldiers' homes, the rest homes. They should have locked the doors.
Yep.
The workers that were there should have been sequestered for whatever time it took, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. They should have been there. They should have called their family, had them bring a change of clothes. And I'm sorry, but you're here for the duration. until we can get this right. The only problem is now getting, if somebody gets sick, how do you now get them out? And it was suggested to us, when this first happened, there were facilities that they were bringing the patients to the front door and meeting us at the door, so we didn't have to go all the way in. And it's not for our protection to do that. That's for the residents' protection, so that we don't bring something in, because anybody going into those facilities is going to be the vector on this. Now it's just, it's too late at most of those places.
One of the other things that
Yeah.
comes up a bit, and Charlie Baker gets up there and starts talking about all of the new testing facilities that he's opening up, almost opening up. Every single one of them is inside of 128, except for Lawrence and Lowell. But everything else, there's nothing out here. No money has come out here for testing. You can't even get masks out in this neck of the woods.
Well, there is a list of test sites there, George, that, are on the website there, and there are, these emergency care places like the one down there on Fitchburg, I know does do testing.
It's the only one.
And, there's quite a few, of course, in Worcester and so on. But that's a different, I guess, issue.
That's a different-
Paul, what do you think of this regulation thing, or this idea of trying to limit the people that go into the Lunenburg Housing Authority?
Well, I meeting already.
Paul, did you have some thoughts on it?
Yeah, I personally agree with Warren. We had my nephew is a physical therapist, and everybody on the second floor has COVID now. And you're right, there was a vector. There was a worker that came in, and he was positive, and it just went through the place. So, being prior military public health, I agree with Warren.
Yeah.
How these places have gotten the outbreaks, the soldiers' home, it's the people that went home came back in with them, the workers. Or if a resident goes out, gets sick, goes to the hospital, and then comes back, they might have got it then.
That's
And
interesting.
some of these places started their masks and gloves and everything else. Like Warren was like a couple weeks late. It was already starting, and they didn't even have PPE at that point. I mean, if you didn't get it until a couple weeks after. So.
Okay. Is that satisfactory for some overall guidance, Jim, at this point?
Sure. So I'll talk to the housing authority, and I'll get back to you guys as to whether they have had complaints about people, whether I don't know that we have any cases there, top of my head. So it's not like it's a hotspot. They do have the ability to have their own units and actually keep the proper social distancing. Again, they're not big buildings, so there's not lots and lots of people. If they have a common area, and I'm not sure if they do, I would certainly recommend that they close the common area if they have it already. But I guess that's recommendations I would have.
Dave, I didn't mean
could
to
we
skip
draft
over
something
you.
in the form of a suggestion rather than a legally binding or punitive thing? To just
You can always do strong advisories.
suggest.
Yeah,
Right.
you can always do strong advisories. I mean, it's a good way to kind of ramp it up. It kind of puts people on notice. If they do the right thing, then maybe you don't need to go any further. So that kind of a thing isn't bad.
We ask Warren to mute his mic.
Oh, kids.
Yeah, every little noise in the background gets amplified into the meeting.
Dave, did you have some thoughts on this? So you haven't.
My general feeling is that there really isn't a strong, I can't come up with the word right at the moment, but a strong reason for us to send anything in regards to especially 131 White Street. It's under the management and control of the housing authority. They have every right to put precautions in place. I tend to agree with maybe an advisory to the authority to do what they see fit within the guidelines of, what's been suggested for facilities of that type. And maybe Jim could expand on that when he communicates with them. Other than that, I don't see us developing an order at this point, unless obviously if something changes down there and it becomes a hot spot, then it's almost automatic anyway.
Mhm. Sounds good. Okay, Jim, did you have some other,
Nope, that would
items?
be it. Yep, that
If
would
it
be
becomes a hot spot, then it's too late.
True, yeah. Good point.
Jim, you talked about mentioning to them that perhaps they could have a ledger or a book or something like that on a voluntary basis. I think if you do talk to them about that, make that suggestion to them, that you make it very clear that they can't use the authority of the Board of Health to, whoops, what happened? Okay. Use the authority of the Board of Health to enforce that. That
No,
has to be
I
something
think
you
in
have to
Littleton, what they did,
tell them
they made it
rather than meeting. Sorry?
and in Littleton, they made it a volunteer kind of thing. They just posted on the door and asked people to sign in when they came into the building.
Yes, and that's the way it should be, but it shouldn't use the authority of the Board of Health to enforce that.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? That, it's a recommendation of the Board of Health. The Board of Health shouldn't appear anywhere in that notice. They can ask the people to do it, but the people have to realize that they're under no obligation to do that.
Okay. Jim, the last item that you sent out, I think on account that I forwarded, that you had sent us over the weekend, went back to like April 29th, and I think there were like 34 cases at that time.
I think it's,
You told me 36 on the phone today.
yeah, as of today, I'm just taking a look. A couple came in today, so it's either 36 or 38. I'll send the new number out to you, Perry.
Okay.
We get off the call or the video.
Yeah, I had it as 36, Jim.
Yeah, I think that's, but let me just see where the cutoffs are. I'm trying to stick to a particular cutoff so that as new cases come in, it's accurate for the day that I send it to you.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that, as Jim has mentioned in the earlier notices, with the last paragraph, that nobody seems to go that far in the reading, that the data that we're reporting is seriously flawed. By no means the Board of Health's fault, the Associated Board of Health's fault, but they're getting their information from, and correct me if I get it wrong, Jim, the State Department of Public Health notification system. There are, I'll guarantee you, and obviously a lot of cases that are not getting reported through that system, either by not actually being tested or being presumptive cases that local physicians have just decided you don't need to be tested. You've obviously got to go home for 14 days. So
Have you seen the CDC's report that they've amended their report, or actually been more clear about the number that they had of 65,000 deaths in the country? They've actually reduced that to, I believe, 15,000 or so that actually they can prove was COVID related,
Right.
because initially they were counting all deaths from pneumonia.
Yep.
So
right,
we're going to be.
That speaks to my point of inaccurate data, and that's going to be happening through this entire thing. I describe these numbers games, especially in the press, as a never-ending baseball game score. And it doesn't serve a real good purpose, except maybe to scare people a little bit.
Yep. You're right, Dave.
To Perry, if I might, on the numbers, I think the state certainly strives to get the information out that they believe is correct. So when a report goes into the state lab, that comes out to us, where sometimes we get errors. Sometimes the addresses are wrong. And I still have a hard time figuring out how somebody gets their address wrong when somebody is asking them about that at a testing location. I mean, we've had situations where they've listed a parent's address who no longer live there, and they don't live there either. So that's where some of that error comes in and counts. Sometimes a report comes in and gets revoked because there was either the test was inconclusive. So it's not off by much, but it's off by 1 or 2, which is maddening when you're trying to find that 1 or 2 cases why you're different than what the numbers might be at the state level. But I think if people are looking at generally what's the situation in the state, the new information that the Department of Public Health is putting up on their website, they went from having like 1 page, like a web page of information, to having essentially a 32 or 33 page report on all kinds of data that's coming out. And that data is actually, there's enough numbers there. We're talking hundreds of thousands, we're talking tens of thousands. So all of a sudden the data has a little bit more meaning to it. And so if you're looking at trends, and you can actually hear the governor talk about some of that data in being part of his decision making, that data I think is useful for people to take a look at.
Jim, would you agree though that hospitalizations are probably the only number that on a day-to-day short-term basis really tells you what's going on?
Well, so hospitalizations, they're dropping, which is a good thing. So I think that's one of the bits and pieces of information he's using. The number of people testing positive relative to the number of tests seems to be down in the past week, which is a good sign, even though some days, I mean, we had one day in the past 3 or 4 where they did 15,000 tests in a day, which is an awful lot of tests considering we were starting, the high early on in March was like in 3,000. I think the other thing that they're looking at is the number of deaths. And today, I think the number of deaths were down again. So, but unfortunately, deaths are kind of a lagging indicator. Once you go to the hospital, it really depends what's happening. So, it gives you all that information on that sheet, which is good to see Commonwealth-wide.
But I think Warren's point was a good one too, where early on in this, they were showing the coronavirus deaths, and it was like anybody who died who had it, that was what was being attributed as the cause. Whereas in fact, the number who were dying from pneumonia otherwise, or from heart disease otherwise, or all these other things were down year to year by a great deal, like maybe half. So that, certainly the coronavirus was a factor, but, or may have been a factor, but it wasn't alone, obviously. Yeah, it's a very difficult set of numbers, and it's very hard to keep them on the same basis, or how to know how to use them or compare them.
They've been using that phrase associated. He died from associated errors from COVID. I guess the only way you could really get a real solid number is to test people after they died. And if you've got it, then you got it. Gotcha. If you're a healthy person and you went in, you caught COVID and you died, well, okay, you're pretty sure that that's what got you. But this associated stuff and complications resulting from, that gets a little bit dicey.
Yeah. So I don't, Jim, did you have any more on this?
Nope, I'm all set on that.
Okay. The next item on our agenda really is our minutes approval. And we have 2 sets of minutes. One is February 3rd and one is March 2nd. I don't remember which is the one that you did, Paul, and which is the one that Andrea
I did February and Paul did March.
Okay. Let's take February 1st. Have you all had a chance to read those? Are there any changes or additions to the February 3rd minutes that Andrea did? Can I have a motion to accept those?
So move.
Second.
Dave Passios, so move.
Okay, and who was the second? I'm sorry.
Me, Warren Mayhew.
Okay, Warren Mayhew seconded Dave Passios's motion to accept the February 3rd, 2020 minutes. All those in favor, and again, I'll do a roll call on this just to be careful. Paul Fortin. Paul, you're muted, but
Aye.
okay, thank you. Warren,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
and I guess I should be giving your whole names. That was Warren Mayhew and Dave Passios and George Eman.
Yeah, aye.
And I, Perry Jewell, I'll vote aye as well. So the February 3rd are approved. Now, on the ones that Paul did in March, I know he kind of apologized as he sent them out, but I had a couple of comments on them, but I had no problem with what was there, but I would add a couple of things. Does anybody, I might as well, since I started talking, finish. I thought that number one, we should state that they had each of those, there were two that were considered that they did pass unanimously in both cases.
Right.
And the other thing that I thought was important, and you may need some help, and Andrea had actually said she could just add this in there, but we should say really what the variances were that were being requested in the minutes so that if we look back on them in the future, and that's right in the letters that she has. So she had proposed really that she could just add to those two, what the variances were that were being requested. And then if we added the fact that, the vote was unanimous in favor of granting those variances, that would satisfy me. Did anybody have any other ideas on those?
I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes as amended.
Is there,
Second.
okay,
Dave Passios, second.
yes. So George Eman has moved that we accept the March 2nd minutes as amended. And Dave Passios seconded that motion. All those in favor?
Aye. Oops.
Yeah, well, George, go ahead.
Aye. Aye, 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 aye.
Dave Passios,
Aye.
Warren Mayhew,
Aye.
and Paul Fortin.
Aye.
And I, Perry Jewell, vote aye as well. That's good. So Andrea, you'll be able to make those,
Yeah, I'll fix them. I'll add the variances that were requested and I'll put all in favor at the end of
I think that's all it
the
needs.
motions.
Perfect. Okay, the other item of old business that was next there was these rubbish regulations that we worked so hard on at the one workshop. Kind of, you probably noticed that when we were in the meeting, we had kind of chosen that we liked the wording on the air ones the best, as I recall, was air?
Harvard.
Harvard. I guess,
Harvard.
the best. And the reason that we liked those was they had bullets instead of, they made it easier to read. Well, when Andrea went to get the files, that we could use to edit that and incorporate them into a draft for ours, it ended up that those bullets had gotten rejected at a higher level. And now what they have in there, of course, is the more formal legalese, that refers to kind of, so you could reference them in a lawsuit or something, or in a citation, so that, it's all in terms of paragraphs and, like laws are written. And that's what she picked up, and that's what she sent back out to us. I don't know if that's really the way we want to leave that or how we want to go from there, but we need another workshop, I think, one of these days before we further
I'm
with
not
these.
sure. Excuse me.
And I don't see that on the horizon, given the current, there doesn't seem to be quite the pressure, even from the town manager at this point to worry about a June deadline as she was before.
Barry, I'm not sure I understand what happened to the minutes. I got a copy of them, and I thought they were fine as printed out. Somebody changed the verb.
The formatting was changed. One of the things that I was most attracted to in the Harvard version of the regulations was that they were easier to read because they were
Right.
bulleted format, and that all went away. So that it,
Wait, what? How did it go away?
When Harvard went to their final, they changed the format. So what
when
you
they
were
sent them
looking
to
at.
their lawyers and, and others,
What-
they got changed.
What you were looking at was not their final. That was a working draft. When I finally got the final from Harvard, it was different in format and some wording than what you used at your meeting as something that you liked.
Okay, well, we have to look at them again. If any of the verbiage changed, we have to look at it again.
I agree.
Right, and
That's what I was
I
just
made
saying.
it match what you guys wanted, but the final format was different. Their bullets, their indents, their
Yeah, I know.
structure was different.
What happened was we got the copy that I was using and that we used at our workshop from Irene and not from Harvard themselves.
Correct.
And subsequently, when Harvard went to their lawyer or when it was sent to the state for a final approval, at some point that formatting was changed to be
You know what?
release type of, which could be easily referenced.
Andrea, if you could perhaps look into that and find out why it was changed. What was the objection to the bullets? Because if it was just some clerk sitting down typing it and didn't
No,
like them,
George. What
What?
you looked at your meeting was
Yep.
not their final voted on regulations. It was a working copy. So their
understand.
board decided to change it for whatever reason before they made it into their final regulations.
Their board changed it.
Their board changed it.
Yeah, the one that Andrea was working with is the one that their board, that is the regulation for Harvard.
Right, that they
And it is
approved.
the one that they approved. But I'm just saying it wasn't what we had been given as Harvard's.
Correct.
We haven't seen their final draft. Then.
I sent it to you. All of you.
I don't have it.
Okay.
All right, I can
just
send it again.
At any rate, that's where that's at, okay? That it,
And what's to say that we can't go with the format that we were working with originally unless somebody can come up with a legal reason why we can't?
Exactly.
Can I just for a second, the reason that I called Harvard and asked that they send their regulations over, because those are the ones you guys liked, is so that I didn't have to retype them all. So the words are very similar. It's the formatting, it's the bullets, it's the numbers that are different. So if that's what you want, I can go in and format it the way, whatever way you guys like.
Oh yeah, that's what we liked.
yeah, we did prefer that. There's no question
Okay.
about that. I know it's
Unless
more.
there was legal,
type it that way.
unless there was a legal reason. That was my question. Why did they change?
Yeah, I don't know
it?
why. I don't really know
That's
why.
why we should probably try to find out.
Well, because their board didn't like the bullets. I don't know, it's,
I'm talking about legal reasons.
We're a different board.
right, that's what
Right.
I'm saying. So if you like the bullets, then you can have the bullets.
Yeah, I like bullets.
Yeah, I like them better too.
It's easier to read, Harry.
Yeah, it was. It was much better. It was much easier to. So at any rate, that's where that's at. And let's do both those things, Andrea, if you would, please. Harvard ought to be willing to tell us what happened, how they got from what we saw was with Irene to what they ended up approving. Was it just at their board's prerogative, or was it because their lawyer reviewed it and suggested that they needed to have reference points that could be clearly identified in citations and
Well, I would think we'd want to have Adam take a look at them, our attorney take a look at
we
them.
would do that anyway, right?
Sure, yeah.
We would do that anyway. All right, so there's a couple of to-dos there. That's pretty much it, with the exception of, we have our Title V inspection reports that are listed there. Again, we're not looking at those. Andrea, there's 7 that you have listed there. Were any of those failures
Yeah,
Is that something you and Jim could look at least and,
yeah, usually I pull them out and then I just keep asking them if testing's been done.
Could we have the addresses,
And
please?
99% of the time, the testing is done. Once in a blue moon, they just don't do anything.
do you recall offhand which of these failed?
Yeah, I'm looking.
I think you have the whole
Two of
stack.
them, 58 Page Hill Road.
Okay,
Testing's been done on that one.
I'm sorry,
The testing has been done on
Yeah.
that one.
and 26 Ramgren.
Testing's been done on that one.
26 or 28?
28 is what's listed here, but,
I think it should be 26, it's a typo.
okay.
So what will happen, because testing's been done, I will file these in the file drawer.
Does anybody have a need to see any of those if they passed?
Yeah.
Or if the
Nope, yeah.
testing's been done? At least you're aware that, that they're there, what they are. Normally,
Yeah.
these are what we would circulate at the meeting.
Right. And then normally I would ask if the testing's been done, and then I
Right.
put them away.
And what was the conclusion on the 26 Ramgren? Was the testing
It's
done?
26, not 28.
Yeah, but was the testing done there?
Yes.
On both of those, okay.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so the only other thing that's left on our agenda really is the public discussion. Unless any of the members, I guess, would like to say anything before that. Is there any discussion from the board? Yeah, Dave?
Just a request for a future agenda item. I'd like an update on Arbor Street.
Okay, that's fair.
I was thinking that myself. That to the best of my knowledge, I don't know, Jim can answer that. Have we gotten a permit application on that?
No.
I doubt it because, yeah,
I think we just need to do a follow-up, and it needs to be on an agenda before we talk too much about it.
that's true.
Right, but do you want me to send an email or make a phone call?
No, I
Okay.
don't think so. He has, you know, the last one we sent, I think that if we should put it on the agenda as a follow-up item, and we may want to draft a response as a result of talking about it at the meeting and sending it out. And really, to do that, June 4th will be ample time because you're just,
Didn't we give him a year or six
yes,
or 8 months?
yes. But you
Right,
were
that's what
saying-
I'm saying. I can make a phone call or send an email to maybe get them to do it rather than getting.
Well, I mean, that's all we would be doing in the other. The only difference
Okay.
is we would just be doing it officially as
You know,
opposed to you taking the
I
action.
don't know. It may be too early for that, I'm thinking, just because we don't need him all of a sudden accusing us of harassing him 5 months in
Right.
advance. So you see, so there is that to consider.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have to word that very carefully, but just at the same time, that was really at one time why we didn't set some interim dates on this thing.
I
It's
probably
an
would.
awkward one. It's an
I thought
awkward.
I thought the tank replacement was sooner than a year. Am I wrong?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
has
well-
till January.
I'm sorry, Andrea, didn't catch that.
Yes, he had a year. I'd have to get the exact, he had until 2021.
But during our conversation, if I recall, if my memory serves me, he made the comment that he was going to have the tank replaced right away.
And at one
No,
time
he
he
said he was
mentioned
gonna
Bob
do it in the
Proctor,
summer.
but
Yeah, he may not have done that. I don't know. But
Well,
that
we're
wasn't
coming into the
that
summer.
wasn't part of our deal with him, so I don't know.
we're just now coming into the summer. So
Right.
now's the time to maybe think about what we want to do or not do. I think we ought to consciously make a decision what we want to do at this point or not do.
He's doing a subdivision too and adding property onto his property.
Well, he's going to maybe be for us in that regard at some point.
Well, so.
Right,
if-
he's adding
if-
quite a bit.
If I read the plans correctly, it's a piece of property from the abutter being added to his property.
Right,
So no real consequence to him, but the person subdividing needs to go through the process.
Okay,
Yeah, there was a driveway that was looking like it might be causing some problems. If I remember that situation.
I don't know if that's the same one, but let's have an item and just an update.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Flat Hill Road.
Yeah, you are. I am. You're right. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And
Right,
I've got to get, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I'll talk to you, all of you about it in a bit. I got to get something signed by Jeff Avini for those 2 agricultural lots.
Yeah,
So we can talk about that once I talk to him. I'll send an email around.
okay. But the other thing that, if you're talking with Bob Proctor as he's picking up this other one, you might ask him about the other one we were just talking about, because Bob's name was mentioned at one time.
You're
Although
right.
I think,
You're talking about Arbor Street?
yeah.
Okay.
Although I don't think that he is planning to do it, actually. And we
No,
didn't-
somebody
Bob's
told
name
me
in.
who was doing it, and I
Yeah.
don't remember because it's not a name I'm familiar with.
Yeah, but maybe Bob could, refresh your memory or
Okay.
our memory. Because Bob seems to know him pretty well.
Yeah, there's a particular person that Woody uses for his work, and Bob knew that person's name. And then when I asked Jim knew that person's name too, but I can't remember who it is because I don't know.
Well, I think Dave's point's well taken, that it's time, we ought to think about it. Take a
Absolutely.
look at it. Take a look at it a little bit. Okay, like I mentioned, the next item would have been public discussion, but based on, the list I see, there is no public that's joined us at all.
I'd make a motion. We adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, is there a second?
Second that,
Okay, we have a
Is
motion.
that
and-
Warren?
Warren, yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, we have a motion by George Eamon, seconded by Warren Mayhew to adjourn. All those in favor, we'll start again with roll call. Paul Fortin,
Aye.
Warren Mayhew,
Aye.
Dave Passios,
Aye.
George Eamon,
Aye.
and myself, I, Harry Jewell, the chair. So thanks
Real
again to
quick-
Jim and Andrea.
Real quick, before we sign off, do we have a tentative date for the next meeting?
June
We talked
1st.
about the first. We talked about the first, skipping 2 weeks from now.
And in the middle of a situation like this, we're only meeting once in a month. Okay, it's up to you guys.
What did you want to meet more for?
I think we should have been more involved in this for over the past 4 or 5 weeks, but that's okay. We're adjourned now, so we'll talk about it later.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
Good night.
Appreciate your being here.
Good night,
Very,
Jim.
very helpful.
Good to see you
Night,
all.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Night all.
Good night.
Good night.